the conclusions of the findings are becoming all the firmer. And the first finding was that warming of the climate system, warming of the surface temperatures of the planet is unequivocal. There is absolutely no question that the planet is warming up. Second major conclusion is that it's extremely likely that human beings are the dominant cause of the observed warming since the middle of the last century. So James Hansen, one of the world's leading atmospheric physicists, used to head the NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York, said if we stay our present course using fossil fuels to feed a growing appetite for energy-intensive lifestyles, we will soon be the climate of the Holocene, the last 10,000 years or so of human history. The eventual response to doubling pre-industrial atmospheric carbon dioxide, and we've increased so far about 40%, so we're well on the way to doubling, would likely be a near ice-free planet. The stakes, he says, for all life on the planet surpass those of any previous crisis. The greatest danger is continued ignorance and denial, which could make tragic consequences unavoidable. And it's the irreversibility and unavoidability of some of this that has people like me particularly worried.
Natural disasters are on the increase, and the graph here shows the number of recorded natural disasters over the last century. And even if you account for poor reporting in the first half of the 20th century, the numbers of cyclones, floods, droughts, and the encroachment of deserts, and if you combine those, they're known as hydrometeorological events, they've simply raced away in the last decade and a half. Aid agencies like ours, Tier Fund, and in this case I'll speak to World Vision as well, are preparing for the worst. And after the Asian tsunami in 2004, aid agencies geared up to handle 2 mega disasters a year. And when you consider that each disaster might cost upwards of around $1 billion as a response, then two disasters at once, sucks a large amount of resource and staff cost. Well, aid agencies are now talking about having to handle 4 mega disasters a year. But there's something far more subtle taking place in the Pacific, and that is the slow and insidious sea level rise. And it's gradually eating away at 75,000 kilometres of Pacific island shoreline. And 18 months ago, I was in Bougainville, PNG, where the people of the Carteret Islands now live. In 2009, the entire community, 2,500 people, had to relocate from their gorgeous island 85 kilometres to the northeast, and they moved into the small coastal town of Tinputs on Bougainville. And these are 2 of the local boys, and their island had been lost to saltwater intrusion, making it impossible to cultivate crops, impossible to keep freshwater wells free of saltwater, and with it went their connection to the land of their ancestors and their unique cultural heritage. They simply up and moved, the entire population group, to the mainland. And so the Carteret Islands, they may be worth nothing to anyone except those indigenous to it. But the direct cost of sea level rise in the Pacific is estimated to be around $1.5 billion a year. And of course, to the people of the Carteret Islands, that's everything. And I'll put it like this: how can Bangladesh move out of poverty permanently if 20% of the country will be underwater in 50 years? The sad irony is this: as we grow ever richer in comparison to the poor, we have both the wealth to aid them in their development, and we have the global carbon footprint to stamp that development out. And so even though we have halved those living in absolute poverty from the time when we set the Millennium Development Goals, we can simply unravel that in a few short years with climate change.
I'm going to borrow from one of the great old famous expressions in the investment community. There are investments that, if they go up like a rocket, they come down like a stick. In other words, they fizzle out very fast. This is the up like a rocket, down like a stick. This is another way of looking at that carbon budget. So that's what's been going on with global CO2 emissions per year, the rate per year. And that's how fast they are going up. In order to achieve a low carbon economy, they've got to come down like that. So that's the investment challenge. So it's really important to take the first step to divest It won't free up a great deal of money because you'll find fossil fuels are not a large part of your portfolio, and you will very easily be able to reinvest that money in other areas that you are very comfortable with and know well. And in due course, you, I hope, will also be able to invest in alternative technology as well. But the first and most important step is divestment itself. This isn't about trying to drive fossil fuel companies out of business. That will be extremely hard to do. It's about making life a lot harder for them. It's about trying to change their behaviour, and it's about trying to get the weight of investment money going elsewhere.
Why divest? To me, this is a question of integrity and credibility. If the churches are wanting to make statements like the statements I put up on the slides earlier about the importance of responding to climate change, about the need for urgent action, we can't do that. We can't make that urgent call at the same time that we are seeking to profit from the fossil fuel industry. And so this is, first and foremost, a question of integrity and credibility as a moral voice, I think, on the part of the churches in New Zealand.
Whether one's a Christian or not, I cannot see how the damage we're going to inflict on the planet is morally acceptable. And I think this is really at the heart of the matter. What are we prepared as human beings to tolerate and to say this is acceptable? Are we going to be willing to face future generations and say, yes, we put our investments in fossil fuel companies and the returns we get ahead of all your interests and considerations against your right to have a hospitable planet? Why? Well, because we were greedy. Wasn't that great? Wasn't that great? Is that what we're going to say? Are we going to be comfortable with that? I, for one, couldn't possibly be comfortable with that.
There's a lot of things as an individual or a church that you can't control, but our contribution to climate change is one that you can. You can decide where you invest, and you can decide how much you drive. That is two things under our control. So from TEFUN's perspective, we think the churches in New Zealand represented here, and others, should simply stand in solidarity with the poor around this issue and withdraw our investments from fossil fuels.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who has been an advocate of the divestment campaign from the beginning, in April last year, just under a year ago, he said the divestment movement played a key role in helping liberate South Africa. The corporations understood the logic of money even when they weren't swayed by the dictates of morality. Climate change is a deeply moral issue too, of course. Here in Africa, we see the dreadful suffering of people from worsening drought, from rising food prices, from floods, even though they've done nothing to cause the situation. Once again, we can join together as a world to put pressure where it counts.